Peter Mojuntin is probably one of the most least known Sabah politicians in modern political history. Because we have to go back all the way to sort of the early 1960s, where he makes an entrance into the political realm amongst the Kadazans in Pinampang. And this is a very outspoken guy, a very intelligent guy who has an opinion about everything, and he's not afraid to make his point. But what he does also then acquire is respect, not only from Kadazan leaders at the time, but also from the UNCO political party leader, Donald Stevens, who sees him as a potential politician with a lot of potential to grow. And he's a staunch defender of Kadazan rights. And when he does enter the UNCO political party, he is one of the heavyweights in the party, even though he's very young in comparison to many of the other elders that also joined the UNCO party. And, for somebody so young to become the Secretary General of a political party, so UNCO evolves from UNCO to UPCO, goes through political turmoil starting immediately as we get into 1964. So it's just 6-7 months after Malaysia is formed, and the UPCO party, merges with PASOK. The UNCO party merges with PASOK from the interior, and so the Dusuns and the Rungos and the Lundayu all come together with the Kadazans to form the UPCO party. This happened sort of in March, April of 64. But immediately it's World War III, because the UNCO and PASOK political leaders did not consult with their partners in the Sabah alliance. So this is USNO and the Chinese political parties, and one little Indian political party that did exist and has been forgotten about. There's World War III. The problem goes all the way to Kuala Lumpur. Tunku Abdul Rahman has to step in to try to resolve the problem, because, Donald Stevens did not discuss the matter with his partners in Sabah Alliance before they merged. And this causes a lot of disunity. So this is a start. This is really the start where it all goes downhill. And it merely continues into 1964. It continues into 1965. Every year in between, there is an issue between the UPCO political party, Donald Stevens, Peter Mojuntin, against Tun Mustafa Harun, the leader of the USNO political party and soon to be Chief Minister of Sabah, third Chief Minister of Sabah. Donald Stevens doesn't last very long as UNCO, UPCO Chief Minister of Sabah. And he's subsequently removed and replaced by Peter Loh, who represents the Chinese political party. Peter Loh is a yes man, and he is put into power by Tunku Abdul Rahman. Tunku Abdul Rahman decides who the Chief Minister of Sabah will be. It is Peter Loh. It is not decided by the people of Sabah through an election or referendum of anything of that sort. Tunku Abdul Rahman and the central government decide that Peter Loh will replace Donald Stevens. Donald Stevens is moved into Ministry of Sabah Sarawak Affairs. It's a ministry that's in Kuala Lumpur, so they pull him away. They take him out of Sabah on purpose, and they put him away in Kuala Lumpur in a little ministry and a little office there, so they can keep an eye on him. But when this happens, the guy that actually is running UPCO and pushing the political agenda in Sabah is Peter Mojuntin. And again, even today, and even the last 10 years, whenever we talk about Sabah political history, only two names keep popping up every single time. Mustafa Harun and Donald Stevens. These are sort of the, people use the term Bapa Sabah, the founders of Sabah, the co-founders of Malaysia, and they forget Peter Mojuntin. He's actually one of the strongest advocates for the formation of Malaysia, because he believes in what Donald Stevens tells him, the benefits that would come to the people of Sabah, especially the Bumiputras. Poverty is rife amongst the Bumiputras in Sabah. The natives, the indigenous peoples of Sabah, are living a life of poverty. Sabah is not a rich state. In the early 1960s, Sabah is not a rich state. If we go into the mid 1960s, Sabah is not a rich state. We get to the end of the 1960s, Sabah is still not a state that has any great wealth. It is a poor state. Most of the people are living in poverty. And if we had a line that separated people who lived above the poverty line and people that lived below the poverty line, most would be below. The other important thing to point out is that Peter Mojuntin goes down fighting until the very end. When the UPCO political party is forced to dissolve in December 1967, he goes down fighting, and he's not alone. There are a number of other senior elder UPCO leaders from other districts who are adamant that the UPCO party should not dissolve. Donald Stevens is determined to dissolve the UPCO party as part of his negotiated, I use the word settlement. It's actually a bailout. Donald Stevens negotiates a bailout with Tun Mustafa and a West Malaysian UMNO lawyer named Syed Kecik. And they negotiate a deal whereby they will buy over Donald Stevens' newspaper in the Sabah Times, and they would also ensure that his timber concession is renewed. The timber concession has come to an end. Donald Stevens has no money, no income, and so he is facing a number of legal suits from creditors in court in Kota Kinabalu at that time. So there's a lot of pressures on Donald Stevens. And the problem with this also is that the timber concession money which Donald Stevens collects is also used to fund the UPCO political party throughout Sabah. All the different divisions, all the different UPCO officers, and all the politicians, for the most part, including the administrators, are all funded by the timber concession which Donald Stevens has on behalf of the political party UPCO. All this comes to an end. Funding is sort of cut off to the UPCO political party, and he is forced to surrender to Tun Mustafa. And this is really the end of the UPCO political party in December 1967. They reluctantly dissolved the political party. They voted to dissolve it within the space of 2 weeks of the matter being brought up with the senior leadership in UPCO. That's sort of early December. So you get towards the end of December and they vote to dissolve the party. And even after then, Donald Stevens encourages members of the UPCO party to apply for membership in USNO. It's a very, very uncomfortable situation because there is no love lost between UPCO and USNO, especially members and leadership. They just do not get along for many reasons. And so you get to this very uncomfortable situation where you're asking somebody, okay, guys, we now have dissolved this political party and we all need to move and join our rivals. And this makes so many of them so uncomfortable. The only person that actually gets any position of power as a cabinet minister is a guy called Gani Gilong from Ranau. And Tun Mustafa accepts one UPCO leader into his cabinet, and that's Gani Gilong. And so out of all the UPCO politicians, it's only Gani Gilong that sort of has a second life almost immediately. The rest are made to suffer. Peter Mojuntin is one of those. He goes through a terrible time, a very difficult and challenging time politically in the State Assembly. He's forever poking away at Mustafa Harun in the State Assembly. They don't have a very friendly relationship until the very end. They just have this absolute dislike for each other. And Peter Mojuntin was never afraid to confront Mustafa whenever he thought Mustafa was doing something wrong. There was nothing really he could do. He couldn't really stop Mustafa, he couldn't stop Syed Kecik, but he could still antagonize them when possible in the State Assembly. There's one story which doesn't get told very often, is a reflection a little bit of Donald Stevens' personality and character. We always hear the positive sides of Donald Stevens. There is a negative side to him, a side that many people do not realize about him. And he actually betrays, and I use the word betray very, very carefully. Peter Mojuntin is looking to form a new political party in Sabah. This information is shared with Donald Stevens, who's away in Canberra as a High Commissioner of Malaysia to Australia. And this information is shared almost immediately between Donald Stevens and Tun Mustafa. So Donald Stevens is essentially giving away a lot of confidential information in this particular regard to Tun Mustafa and keeping him informed of what. Is this a one-off situation? No, it's not. It actually happens several times. There are other incidences that happen, but it sort of tells you a little bit where Donald Stevens is as a person by the early 1970s. He embraces Islam shortly after, and he rebuilds his relationship with his old friend Tun Mustafa. It sort of starts to break down May 1964, very early on. The relationship between Mustafa and Donald Stevens goes downhill very early on. So when you get to early 1970s, Donald Stevens works really, really hard to rebuild that relationship between the both of them. Comes to benefit Donald Stevens because he is summoned back and he becomes the next TYT of Sabah. And so you have the introduction of Tun Fuad Stevens as the new TYT of Sabah. But in the meantime, Peter Mojuntin is sort of fighting a crusade on his own. All the other independent Sabah opposition leaders had been arrested under the Emergency Act of 1969. And they spent over a year in Kapayan prison, so there's no opposition. There's nobody in the State Assembly to challenge Tun Mustafa or USNO at any capacity. So they have a free realm to do anything they want and to pass any legislation they want. And so this is sort of the dark days that we call the dark years of Sabah history, from 1967 all the way to 1976, when USNO is defeated in the elections in early 1976. So again, if I go back to just to sort of summarize, if there's one Sabah political person that does not get the respect he should, and was already one of the early fighters of Sabah rights, and continued fighting for Sabah rights when Donald Stevens left Australia and abandoned the UPCO political party, because he essentially did, and then was sort of betraying Peter when Peter really, really trusted him and needed him. He needed his sound advice, his fatherly advice, his experience. Donald Stevens was sharing information with Tun Mustafa. So one of the incentives that they threw at Peter to get him to stop forming the political party in the early 1970s was to give him a timber concession, because his timber concession was coming to an end. So that was one of the things they did to convince him not to form this political party. The other thing that angered Peter Mojuntin and many Sabahan leaders at that time was the deportation of the Western priests. All the priests that were here, the Catholic priests from foreign countries who were in Sabah, had been here for quite a number of years. So you had, this was just one of a number of things that really, really upset Peter Mojuntin. And I think that is really the basis why his book is still banned even to today, because of what happened at that period of time. It was such a sensitive incident. Nobody wants to talk about it, but it did happen. And it's one of the things you can't really sort of deny it didn't happen. It did happen, along with a whole lot of other things as well. There are a lot of other things that happened between 1970 and 1976 that would shock a lot of Sabahans if you knew what they were. Just incredibly sensitive stuff. But anyways, just to summarize, if there's one Sabah political leader that people really, really should have a really good close look at, it's Peter Mojuntin. He's been forgotten. People don't talk about him. He is remembered amongst elders in the Penampang district who knew who he was, they knew the family and stuff. Otherwise, for the most part, most youngsters in Sabah have no idea who Peter Mojuntin is, and they really, really should go and look at him, look at who Peter Mojuntin was, and look at his values as a person. Not only as a Kadazan leader and a leader amongst the politicians in Sabah, but also as a human being. This guy was a lion, and he went down fighting, and that's really, really the summary that I like to add. He went down fighting till the very end.